Hello, and welcome to AdAge's custom webcast sponsored by Treasure Data. The topic of today's webcast is retail media, a powerful growth engine for brands and advertisers. I'm John Dioso, editor of AdAge Studio 30, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few items to go over before we begin. We'll hear from today's presenters, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. To participate in the Q&A portion of the webcast, all you have to do is type your questions into the Ask a Question text area, and then click the send button. You may submit questions at any time during the webcast, and we'll address as many as time permits after our presenters have prepared remarks. Now, to get started, I'd like to introduce Irene Sabaha, the Retail Industry Principal at Treasure Data, and Umberto Torrielli, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Silverbullet. Irene and Umberto, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Happy to be here.
Terrific. And before we do our deep dive on retail media, why don't you each give a little background about your respective companies? Irene, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for joining this webcast. My name is Irene Sabaha. As John said, I'm the Retail Industry Principal at Treasure Data. We are a customer data platform that is unique in that we serve large enterprises, and we end-to-end do marketing as well as sales and customer service. So large brands come to us to ingest all of their data and provide unified profiles to improve the quality of their marketing. And we'll get into a little bit of why that's important as we move through the webcast. I'll turn it over to Umberto.
Hi, everyone. My name is Umberto Torrielli. I'm a co-founder and chief strategy officer of Silverbullet. We are a global boutique customer experience solutions partner, and we also have a product. Our mission really is to support the world's largest brands with regards to their data strategy as it pertains to delivering excellent customer experiences across multi-channel, as well as having a product that is focused on delivering contextual targeting insights in innovative new ways.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. And let's just start it off. Okay. So what is all the buzz around retail media networks, and what kinds of use cases are best supported by retail media networks for retailers and suppliers? When we have Umberto answer that first, and then Irene could weigh in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, look, we're all here because we're interested in the opportunities that are afforded to retail media networks. Specifically with regards to the application of kind of the first party data that is available to these retail media networks, and what makes advertisers and publishers alike very compelling opportunity to really leverage kind of the insights and the end-to-end measurement that an RMN can kind of provide, right? So I think there are a few different use cases that we see as Silverbullet really pop when it comes to RMNs. First and foremost, I suppose, is obviously the easy one, right, which is activating really smart data sets across an owned and operated network. And that really provides an end-to-end experience that is quite unique, both for obviously the end consumer, as well as some amazing kind of opportunities for an advertiser to really glean some invaluable insights and to learn really what is the type of content that resonates best with their consumers, as well as the best opportunities to really align their branding and their messaging, right, with the available opportunities on site and off premise, by the way, by synchronizing elements such as digital screens and push notifications to customers. I think the other really interesting opportunity that we're seeing kind of growing, and I wouldn't say it's nascent so much as it's currently going through kind of a maturity curve, which is kind of self-service data marketplaces, right? So the idea that a RMN such as any one of the major kind of e-commerce drivers today, as well as smaller e-commerce providers, as well as in-shopper providers, are able to provide kind of self-service environments for advertisers to really directly buy across opportunities and inventory opportunities. From a publisher perspective and from the retail perspective, of course, that means increasing yield in incremental ways and maximizing kind of every kind of environment and operated slot and unit across their own and operated inventory. And for the brand, of course, again, that means that there is a lower cost to operate, right? They can go directly to the retail media network and purchase those media opportunities at presumably a better price. So those are a couple of the use cases that we see really growing in terms of both adoption as well as kind of questions coming up to us as a consultancy.
Irene?
Umberto covered quite a lot. I would say when I think about the buzz around retail media and the hype is, it's largely around we've lost access to third-party cookies as on the supplier side, and on the retailer side, so much sales has been driven online. So there's just a lot more activity happening on a retailer website that makes advertising on site really valuable. And it's no secret that margins in retail, well, particularly in the types of retailers that are most predominantly generating these networks, like the Walmarts and the Targets of the world. Kroger is also a large one. Their margins, the grocery margins, are incredibly thin, and the margins on retail media are upwards, exceed the 70% range. So this is a huge revenue generator for the retailer. And as you can see, like no question, it is growing incredibly quickly, over 20% a year. And part of what's fueling that, in addition to the third-party cookie deprecation, is real concern. Lots of states in the U.S. are passing privacy laws. California, Texas just passed one. And so it's really important to keep everyone's data as safe as possible. And the media networks help ensure that the flow of data is more restricted.
Right. I want to follow up on something that Umberto mentioned before about the self-serve nature of it, or that's becoming more popular. Is self-serve with retail media networks, is it similar, or does it have any overlap with self-serve programmatic? Is that one way for advertisers and marketers to look at it? Umberto, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say, so I think there are two kind of distinct opportunities, right? I think what you have with the ability to buy directly from a retail media network is, full visibility and understanding of where your ads are going to be seen, right? And kind of where your media dollars are going to be spent. And obviously, I think we'll discuss a little bit later, it also unlocks some very interesting opportunities around measurement and attribution, which I think are quite difficult to otherwise attain in general programmatic terms. But in that sense, I think they're kind of two separate things. Although interestingly, there is an opportunity for the learnings of media campaigns being bought and trafficked and delivered across RMN to then be used across open web and programmatic. So there's definitely some crossover there, and I think they as a result are kind of two separate opportunities that are nonetheless interlinked.
All right, I'm always looking for correlations and things in common. I think maybe I have a conspiratorial nature to my brain, but I do see a correlation with the TV industry a little bit in retail media networks, right? The TV and the rapid growth of streaming. The challenge with streaming, as we all know, is fragmentation, right? So do retail media networks face similar challenges? And what challenges are associated with measuring results and ROI for retail media networks?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, Irene, why don't you answer that first, then Umberto come in.
I would say absolutely, fragmentation is a huge issue. I mean, if you're an advertiser, and your product is being sold in multiple locations, all of a sudden you have to be everywhere, and you can't be everywhere because it's too expensive. And so you have to be judicious about where you spend and how you spend. And advertisers this is actually creating quite a bit of stress. The more proliferation we see among media networks, the greater stress brands are feeling, because they are having to divert their brand advertising budgets to these retail media networks. And frankly, the AMA recently did a study, and they talked about how right now brands are still waiting to see if these networks truly drive the value that they say they will. The jury is still out on that. They all are playing, and they're paying to play, but they feel more like they have to, because Walmart Connect And Kroger, for example, I know for a fact, like they take their brands hostage and say, you must spend this if you want this much shelf space. And so they don't really, they don't really have a choice, but there is a desire, given all of the, the constraints that we talked about on the previous slide around the third-party cookies and privacy, et cetera. There is a strong desire to figure this out and a desire for collaboration. And so I think as this trend evolves and matures a little bit more, we are going to see savvy retailers and brands working together to minimize the impact of the fragmentation.
Umberto, what are you seeing from your perspective at Silverbullet?
Yeah,
what are the challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic. And I think in some ways it mirrors a little bit what we saw in the past, especially in Europe, with regards to how publishers started looking at applying data technologies across their networks to increase kind of yield and so on, in the sense that scale is always going to be.
But also in response to privacy regulations. Is that also correct? Also in response to the privacy regulations?
Absolutely.
GDPR.
Absolutely,
yeah.
In response to privacy. Right, exactly. And I think the other element there is always going to be scale, right? It becomes very difficult for an advertiser to achieve any sort of programmatic or digital campaigns without the right scale and the right audience sizing. And so publishers ran into this very early days where they had a finite amount of inventory that they could resell. And oftentimes brands have much larger budgets available to spend. And so it becomes an interesting conundrum where in some cases, publishers just didn't have enough scale. So multiple attempts were made in Europe. And there's still some ongoing, for example, around kind of a coalition of publishers commingling inventory and allowing for opportunities for broader scale and reach. And I think we might be seeing something similar happening with retail media outside of obviously Amazon and Walmart that have quite a lot of traffic and opportunities. The smaller retailers, I think, are going to struggle with providing the scale required to deliver on some of these larger campaigns for larger brands. So it'll be interesting to see how this matures over the next kind of 1-2 years or sooner with regards to addressing that very issue of fragmentation and therefore lack of scale and addressability.
Right. And go ahead, Irene. Sorry.
More comment around that is like obviously the flip side is if you have somebody like Home Depot who has a very specific narrow customer segment that they're trying to reach, Stanley Black & Decker, I'm sure, is happy to invest a lot of money there because they know they're hitting their target market. So it just, the appliance makers, the fixture makers, that's where they're going to advertise. And they don't have to cast that wide net. So the fragmentation works in favor of I think, of the category killers and the niche players a little bit more than the general retailers. That was the only thing I wanted to add.
Right. And I was going to say, Irene, based on something you said before, I mean, obviously third-party cookie deprecation going away has been driving a lot of this. And a lot of people are looking to first-party data as, hopefully something that can push you back over the edges for the information signals that we've lost with third-party cookies potentially going away very, very soon. So, what role does first-party data play as far as, with people using retail media networks? Irene, why don't you answer first, and Umberto, you can weigh in.
Well, first-party data is pretty much everything now because there is no third-party, or the third-party data is disappearing. And this is actually where the value of having a customer data platform is really critical, almost as like a backbone of your MarTech stack, because otherwise your data is living in silos across your organization. Your customer data comes, we had one client, Nestle, recently integrate 90 different sources of data before they did ID unification and really identify who their customers were. So it's incredibly critical to knowing who your buyers are and then being able to segment them and market to them however via whatever activation that you want to pursue, whether it's a retail media network or or something else. I mean, there's really, it's critical. I mean, you can see the AMA study, 56% say it's incredibly important. And so, together over 75% of folks know that first party data is important to the future of marketing.
Roberto, but first party data, obviously, it's everybody's grasping onto it because third party's gone away or is going away, right? Isn't the question, but the challenge, Roberto, right, is what do you do with it? How do you activate on it in the right way? And we talked a little bit about fragmentation. Retail media networks are still relatively new. There are different sources and different signals, obviously. So each retail media network has its own set of first party data. If you're an outside marketer and you're working with all these different platforms, these major ones, talk about Walmart and Kroger and Amazon, et cetera, what is the best way to activate on that?
I'm happy to take that or start. So I think, first of all, I agree with what Irene was saying earlier, as well as you, John. We're obviously big believers in the virtues of first-party data, and we've been extolling the virtues of first-party data for a number of years, even before it became, a sexy thing to talk about, pre-GDPR, right? Pre all these privacy legislations that have rolled out in the U.S. And so fundamentally, we've always been big believers, and this obviously has proven to be true that first-party data is the most valuable asset that any business has. Stop, right? With that, I think what we're seeing nowadays, and I think we might touch on this in a little, is there's a lot of discussion in the industry around what are the best means and ways to create first-party data in a world where third-party identifiers are gone, right? And of course, data clean rooms are having their moment in the limelight, and I think there's some very, very interesting use cases around what is possible and what can be achieved with the data clean room, especially when you consider, clean rooms in light of in a future where every business has a form of clean room. How does that work? How does it become an interoperable situation where data can be shared much more, fluidly and without friction, right? I think that is going to be a big, big piece of the puzzle moving forwards. But the other, I think, really important, sometimes missed point in the industry is that first-party data, while extremely valuable, of course, for activation and segmentation, I think in some cases even more valuable when you look at it from a measurement perspective and from a attribution and again, in results perspective. And what I mean by that is simply, actually looking at yesterday, right? You're probably all aware, of course, that yesterday Apple had their big developer conference. And of course, the big buzz was all around their Apple Vision Pro kind of mixed reality headset, which, side note, might lead to some very interesting opportunities from an advertising perspective. But what flew under the radar a little bit, but is nonetheless very important for our industry specifically, is the fact that Apple announced that in the next version of macOS, as well as the next versions of iOS 17, which will be rolling out this fall, one of the new kind of features within Safari, which has always been kind of the bastion of privacy, so to speak, from a browser perspective, kind of paving the way, will be that any private browsing done on these devices and on Mac computers, essentially all UTM trackers will also be stripped away. And why that's important is, historically, Safari has already been, impossible to target on, given the fact that third-party cookies have stopped being, are not supported on Safari and have not been for a long time. The fact that now trackers, as well as any kind of UTM codes, will be stripped out of the URLs means that unless you're delivering a campaign within a closed, safe environment like a retail media network, it'll be very, very, very difficult, right, to track exactly and to attribute specifically a campaign to a conversion. And I think that's really important because it's a signal of where we're going as an industry, right? It means that some of the current attribution and current methodologies that rely on third-party tags to fire it in open web and programmatic essentially are no longer going to work within that environment altogether. So it means that even more so, first-party data from an activation perspective, but again, from a segmentation and measurement perspective, becomes very, 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 very important, even more so than it has been as we move into this kind of into the future that Apple is sort of leading the way with right now.
Alberto, I think that's actually an amazing point. And just want to back up into one other thing without, tooting too much the horn of the customer data platform. A lot of this targeting without a data identity resolution strategy is you're really going to be much less effective in how you leverage that first party data. Making sure that before you activate, that you have a clean ID resolution process in place is also very important.
Right, and we've been getting a lot of really great questions coming in, and please keep sending them in, and we'll get to them as we can. And I actually want to address one now, since Umberto brought up conversion before, and it's a question from Charlie, and he asked, where does retail media fit best in the marketing funnel as regards to awareness, consideration, conversion, or any trends that we could talk about?
I'm happy to start. So I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it really does depend on the nature of the specific retail media network, right? Going back to what Irene was saying earlier around some of the more niche opportunities and greater opportunities that exist around, using, again, the Home Depot as an example. Some e-commerce experiences lend themselves best to kind of lower funnel activities, given that, again, just the nature of the products they sell, and also, quite frankly, the user experience that a user has on that website. And so there's certainly there's some background noise. There's certainly an element to retail media networks lending themselves very well to kind of lower funnel activities, and to be able to understand very specifically what content was being consumed. Again, we'll touch on this a little bit later, but what content was being consumed that then led to a conversion or an actual purchase, which is very difficult to do outside of an RMN, right? But equally, I think when you look at some of the larger estates for inventory, like a Walmart or an Amazon, where they're generalist and kind of support all verticals, I think that is a massive play for awareness, right? Because you have the opportunity to really understand and segment the type of inventory where you think your brand will perform best from an awareness perspective, ultimately leading to a conversion, which you can actually measure. And so I think it's an opportunity kind of for all phases of that funnel. Again, depending on the actual e-commerce website and depending on the actual vertical. But I do think there's a place kind of from top to bottom for RMN. And I think we still have time to prove it out in terms of understanding where specifically the RMNs will function best.
All right, so going back to we've been kind of diving a little bit deep in the first party data. What is the Treasure Data's perspective on how this is all working? And maybe just a little bit more, you can kind of walk us through a little bit of that, Irene.
Yeah, so I think I've actually spoken to a lot of what's on the slide already. The fact that you have multiple data sources, like I said, Nestle had 90 different data sources, and pulling them all together and doing the integration and creating that ID resolution that will help then follow the customer journey and help with that. What is the next best action or the next best item to suggest to that customer? And combining that with the retail media network is just like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of approach, because you are casting, like we talked about earlier, it's a narrower, and this is where the fragmentation is a benefit, because you know who you're talking to, you know where you're talking to them, and you get a higher return on your ad spend because the conversion is higher. And to Umberto's point earlier, I do think right now the bulk of benefit is coming from lower funnel in retail media networks right now, because that is where we see the conversion, and brands need to be able to have some kind of a justification for their spend. So when they can actually measure the conversion, they can allocate the budget that way. But like we were talking about earlier, just really Treasure Data, besides identity resolution, we're just incredibly safe with our customers' data, very compliant to all of the global security laws. In fact, our CEO takes very seriously being the custodian of people's information, and it's a mandate. Like it's not optional to comply with privacy laws. So that would be another kind of thing about what we're doing, and using AI to help fuel.
There it is, AI, bingo.
You know, the bingo card had to get filled out eventually, right? We've already said data clean room. We've already did cookie deprecation. We're working the bingo card pretty well here. Yeah, so we do use that to the machine learning to help accelerate the decision-making process, to where to go, where to activate what information.
All right, I want to get into the other big A word, the Amazon of it all. All right, so Amazon and Treasure Data have been one of the first companies to collaborate and integrate Treasure Data's customer data cloud with the Amazon Marketing Cloud and the Amazon DSP to enrich customer segments. So can you share details about that joint activity and how it benefits suppliers and advertisers?
So Amazon Marketing Cloud is essentially Amazon's data clean room. And what we're doing is taking the benefit of the CDP and the segmentation that has happened inside of the CDP and loading it into the clean room and getting insights on those individuals that allow us to improve the attribution of those segments, so that when we fly back over to Amazon ads to advertise, we are more targeted, more specific. We know who we're talking to, and we're also able to create an extended lookalike audience to grow the size of the pie, if you will. And it is unique because we are the first CDP to partner with the AMC and the DSP on Amazon. And it's exciting to see the preliminary results of what's happening here. Like for example, we have one of our clients is in the candy business, and we learned through the leveraging the Amazon Marketing Cloud that consumers of this candy actually happen to also be coin collectors. So now we know when the coin collectors are there, like to advertise the candy and drive conversion on the so we're going to see a lot more of that, and I think that there's a small window where this is we're unique in that way, but this is the direction that the data clean rooms and the CDP collaboration is moving.
Again, very important to stress the data clean rooms and how that for privacy reasons, correct? I mean, that's why that's such a buzzword. Right.
And pretty much it's kind of everyone's going to have a data clean room pretty soon, right? Because you have to, if you want to be able to commingle your data with anybody else's data to get insights, which without third-party cookies will be one of the only ways to get in these incremental insights. You have to have that safe, confident space where that data can commingle and generate insights to drive business forward.
Umberto, can you shed some light on how the technology for data clean rooms enables and how these things work together to deliver more value?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think, we could probably spend another 2 hours talking about clean rooms and kind of their technology and how they work and why they're so interesting today and why they're really gaining momentum, right, of course. But I think specific to how this all works for retail media networks and why a clean room becomes a fundamental component of an overall data architecture to support the ambitions of some of these retail media networks. I think clean room obviously is essential because it allows for that private exchange of data between brand and advertiser, brand and retail media network rather. But alongside with the clean room, most of the architectures that we're seeing built to support either self-serve retail media networks or kind of some of the more sophisticated networks include obviously the element of having a CRM setup, which is drawn in a way that it can really segment and help segment and unify the data back into a platform like a CDP. obviously as one of many sources, but understanding purchase history, purchase behavior, past purchase behavior clearly, and intent unified against activity and behavior on site is what then creates these very powerful audience segments, which of course then a brand can match against using a clean room. So I think obviously each clean room has its own USP, and each clean room has its own kind of features that make a clean room specifically more or suited for particular opportunities. AMC obviously is unique to the Amazon network, but we see other clean rooms that enable very interesting interoperability between clean rooms technologies, right? So that essentially you're not tied down to any particular clean room or any particular database or any particular data warehouse. And I think that again is the future of where we're heading with regards to clean room technology in general and data sharing in a post kind of third-party cookie world.
Any interesting insights you could provide, like candy eaters love coins? You've seen there?
No, because that would be a breach of GDPR. No, I'm kidding. We do have some interesting insights that I'll show you in a couple of slides from now that actually interestingly are tied to contextual insights rather than anything tied to profile. Right. And what is interesting about that is that, of course, contextual is disassociated entirely from any sort of IDs. Which means that it's by design privacy safe. So some interesting use cases there.
All right, great. So before we do that, though, I want to just give you a little bit to talk a little bit more about contextual and how Silverbullet thinks about leveraging first-party data.
Yeah, sure. So we've built, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we've built our own contextual targeting insights product. So I won't spend too much time talking about the product itself. It's not a sales call here, of course. But what I did want to call out is specifically an integration that we've built with Treasure Data, which is unique to market. We believe we're the first in the industry to have built something like this with any CDP for that matter. We're really proud to have built this integration with Treasure Data. And what it allows us to do is essentially understand, again, looking at a post third-party cookie world, right, where third-party data, third-party insights, third-party attribution is all kind of, let's call it gone. We wanted to build an integration with the CDP so that we could enable essentially the enrichment of profiles using contextual data. So think of contextual data as an incremental enrichment data point for profiles within the CDP. So taking content consumption patterns essentially and incrementing what a brand knows or a retail media network knows for that matter about that customer, but using again privacy safe contextual data. So we don't have to spend too much time on this particular slide. It's more of an architecture slide around how we pipe data back and forth to the Treasure Data CDP. But if you go into the next slide, I think this is just a sample and a kind of a screenshot of the type of insights that we pulled from campaigns that are running with our tag that is analyzing the contextual consumption patterns of consumers being exposed to media, right? But this is true both for open web and, of course, for retail media networks. And the idea here is, to use a very simplistic example here, I suppose, but what we're essentially enabling is the ability to understand what type of content was a user browsing. And again, content can mean different things. It could be video content, it could be displayed, so article content, or it could be particular sections on a retail media website, right, on an e-commerce store. What type of content was being consumed when an advertisement was displayed? And how did that resonate, right? Essentially, what was their incremental performance that was gleaned from when that ad was seen within a particular topic or particular context versus another? And so, while this information to date has been used for at least for our platform from a targeting and in order to improve targeting and optimize targeting, right, and to draw these insights. The beauty of it is, of course, that when this is deployed alongside a Treasure Data implementation through the Treasure Box integration we've built, this enables a lot of interesting kind of segmentation and modeling to happen within the CDP specifically. So once you've incremented what you know about a customer, so past purchase behavior, current purchase behavior, loyalty information, right? Anything that has been kind of unified within the Treasure Data CDP. And you've now supplemented that with, well, these are the type of content that a user was consuming when they engage with an ad and then purchased a product. You can understand how within the CDP you can leverage that data to not only create further refined audiences, but further to model that data out and to create, if you will, contextual lookalike models, which then can be deployed back onto the open web. So going back to something we touched on earlier, right, and the interconnection and correlation between these two worlds, the idea very much is that given that there's a finite amount of inventory available, presumably on some of these retail media networks, or in general, right, it's difficult to find the right audience when you start with just a finite first-party data audience. If you understand the content consumption patterns of users on, within these networks, you can understand what type of content resonates with your brand, for that brand and for that campaign, and then look to target that in the open web, right? So it's a bi-directional integration that we've built, again, that enables first-party data to be associated with contextual data, modeled, and then used to target cookielessly on the open web and programmatic, and then again back into the system to kind of always optimize. So that's kind of what we've built, and we think is part of the equation and puzzle of how we're going to be able to do much smarter things with data in a completely private conscientious way.
Right. And like we said before, you mentioned, oh, go ahead, Irene. Did you want to say anything?
I think you're on mute.
Coming full circle to this idea of retail media networks are growing and what they're doing for brands and retailers. I mean, what Umberto is talking about is exactly this is the fuel for growth going forward. And I'll turn it back over to you, Umberto, to do the use cases that you have there. But I just wanted to kind of close the loop on why we're here to talk about retail media networks.
Right. The walls between publishers and retail media networks are really coming down. I mean, everybody's a publisher, basically, if you have a site with that first-party data, especially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Umberto. So we want to talk about a use case. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, look, this is just kind of a straightforward use case, but one that I think is interesting to highlight sort of how this technology can work. And so in this particular use case, we had a customer, which is a global CPG brand, or FMCG, if there's anyone joining us from across the pond. And their predominant kind of metrics for the campaign that they're running was really to increase reach, so awareness, right? And specifically, they were very interested in the viewability element of their campaign. And so what essentially we're able to provide was the ability to understand what type of content was driving the highest viewability, right? And so that which in and of itself is innovative from a contextual data perspective alone in programmatic and open web, but further by piping those insights into the customer's CDP, essentially they were able to create and model a segment that basically was the combination again of first-party data, so this particular audience plus the insights on the kind of content they were consuming, creating a segment out of that and understanding, therefore, what were the targets and topics that they should be targeting back on the open web, as well as, again, continuing their retail media targeting. And that essentially increased the viewability of the overall campaign by over 20%, which was the KPI that we're going for. So I think it just an illustrative example of the type of, the benefit, I suppose, of being able to commingle contextual data enriched against a profile to then be able to reactivate that within a retail media network and on the open web.
Perfect. Irene, do you have anything else to say before we get to questions?
No, let's go to the questions. Let's
do it. Thank you guys so much. And a lot of great questions came in during the presentation. Let me just start with this one. There's a good one from Nicole. Do you think retailers are being held to the same standard as it relates to ROI? It feels like retailers are rushing to create these platforms and require brands. This is what you mentioned before, Irene. Require brands to pay to play, but aren't delivering on results. Is it still early? Is it too early? I guess is the question to kind of measure that out. Or what is your perspective on that question? Then Umberto, you can weigh in as well.
I think retailers are being held to the same standards, but it hasn't caught up yet. I think initially there were no standards. It was the wild, wild west, and retailers were growing and they were saying, you want to be on the shelf, you got to invest this. And you see people. I live in Bentonville, Arkansas, so I am very familiar with what's happening at Walmart and Sam's from a media network, and they are diligently working on a closed loop. They know that advertisers are not going to continue to advertise if they do not see results. So they are working very hard on that, and I guarantee you that that they are holding themselves to that standard. And advertisers will take their money eventually and walk. I think the bigger challenge I see for the advertisers is this fragmentation issue that we talked about earlier, because there are so many places to spend money. Do I invest in my brand and what my brand stands for and what my brand means, or do I invest in messaging across all of these places as I try and figure out which place is the best place for the people I'm trying to reach? So short answer, long answer, short to your question is not yet, but it's coming.
Bernard, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I would just say that I really do believe that retail media networks should actually be held to a higher standard than anything that's come before them. And the reason for that is, and again, I can't answer the question as to whether or not they are being held to the same standard. All I can say is they should be held to a higher standard. Why? Because simply they have data that has never, that no other publisher or no other programmatic or open web buy could ever dream to have, right? So the ability to leverage that data, as we've been saying all along, to not only provide super accurate targeting, but more importantly, measurement and attribution, unlike anywhere else, and that's never been done before, right? I think it means that they should be driving results, and they have the ability, they should have the ability to basically deliver incredible performance for brands. And so again, I do think that they should be held to a higher standard because they have the ability to really deliver something that is quite unique and valuable.
Right. So our next question kind of refers back to, I think, one of the studies that we referenced earlier in the presentation. And the question is, when it comes to retail media measurement, retailers can use actual sales data to measure incremental sales, new customers, et cetera. But that being said, why do only 6% of advertisers trust the reported media metrics? Sales data is the holy grail for measuring sales, after all. Who wants to take that one? Kind of the trust factor, the only 6% trusting that measurement.
Happy to defer or happy to take it, whatever is easier.
I think that a lot of it has to do with, and I've seen some of this reporting as being on a retail side and working for a brand. And in general, the numbers always seem to inflate the ROAS, and that creates that lack of trust, because a retailer.
So it's more of a perception than reality. Is that you think what it is? It's really more just that perception.
I think what's happening is I'm a retailer. I look at my sales and I say, well, I didn't get the same lift that you're saying I got. Where's the discrepancy? And there is a lot of work that goes into trying to peel that onion around what are real results. And I think what happens is sometimes advertisers will attribute, it's sometimes hard to attribute a conversion to a particular exposure. But I think advertisers have a tendency to take, I think that the media folks have a tendency to take credit for conversion that the advertiser may not feel like they necessarily deserve. That makes sense. Umberto, what do you think?
Right.
Yeah, no, look, I think fundamentally the mistrust probably comes from the jaded, nature of our industry. If I'm completely honest, hot take, right? Unfortunately, ad tech in general has not necessarily been the most transparent of industries when it comes to specifically performance reporting, reconciliation of billing, like all these things that make it so that, again, there are many historical events that have happened with regards to mistrust and misusage of media funds and so on. So I think that's probably where this is based from. But again, going back to what Irene was just talking about and what I was saying prior as well, I think retail media has a massive opportunity to really to gain that trust very quickly by demonstrating super transparent reporting around performance and around what is driving purchases and conversion, which ultimately, right, is the holy grail. Going back to sales data and sales metrics, but that is the thing that has eluded really marketers in programmatic for the longest time, simply because the tools that are available to them function predominantly on third-party cookies. And so, you look at what was available today and what retail media has an opportunity to do. I think it's a case of just needing to rebuild that eroded trust. But I think that can happen very quickly with the right results.
Here's a great question, and we're talking about retail after all, right? We've been really leaning to the retail media networks, but this is a great question. And can you talk about a little bit about digital versus physical channels and how brands are thinking about activating across them? Any insights into which brands use more effective? So how does that question, through the sphere or the scope of retail media and retail media networks?
Right. Can
you answer that?
You ask the question again?
Repeat it? Yeah. Can you talk a bit about digital and physical channels and how brands are thinking about activating across them? Any insights into which brands use more effective? I mean, we're still at that point, especially post-pandemic, where a lot of people were amping up their digital operations. They were more, mostly brick and mortar operations. And now post that, retail media is really exploding. What do you think about that as far as brands? Are we in a post brick and mortar, or, those channels, how do they play into this?
I would argue that the physical channels are digital marketing is happening inside physical channels. If I'm getting the question correctly, walk into any major grocery store chain today, and you will get a digital projection of a product that someone is advertising, as an example. And if the question is around how do I decide how much to spend inside of brick and mortar versus on digital, I think that that is a math question that every brand has to determine based on where their customers are shopping and how they're shopping. And I don't think that there's a one size fits all response to that question.
And there's a follow-up question from another viewer, and actually I'll throw this one to Umberto. And the question is, if contextual advertising enhances first-party data, are there specific formats of advertising that enhance better than others? So, for example, is out of home near retailers an effective enhancer of retail media networks? So I think this kind of plays into that omnichannel, cross-channel, however you want to think about it. Umberto, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. I think so. I don't know that we can still or yet prove what channel in particular works best for retail media specifically, right? I will say though that we've at Silverbullet and 40, we've done some exploratory work around understanding how to, essentially use context from and contextual insights that we glean from digital campaigns and expand that information to what does that mean for out of home specifically, right? So how does that correlate? How do you correlate topics around, for example, travel and automotive to opportunities within digital out of home? And so we've done some work around that. And while we don't have any results to kind of to tout just yet, I guess stay tuned. So we'll have to come back to that and maybe on the next one and talk a little bit about how that really translates and how that can translate. But I do think, and it's part of the reason why we are doing exploratory work, that there is a correlation between the contextual insights you can glean from online and the understanding of what type of content resonates best with particular brands or campaigns, and how that can then be used in a physical space, including digital out of home. And going back to what Irene was talking about just prior to this, how that translates into in-store opportunities around digital signage, as well as quite simply, I think we maybe touched on this earlier or might have missed out on this, but another big kind of crossover between context, insights, and how that plays into in-store experiences. Again, push notifications and based on still today geolocation and kind of geofencing, but even if that does go away, it's still based on kind of push notifications within store, right? If you're within a Walmart, right, which is obviously a massive store, there are hundreds of aisles, right? There are ways to potentially enable notifications around particular opportunities or particular, and as we've done in the past with end caps, for example, right? to provide kind of digital experiences within the store itself that kind of help perpetuate a seamless customer journey from online all the way into store. So I think this is all very, very new, of course. And, you know, the last decade has been spent on testing a lot of these different things. Some have gone away because of privacy legislation. Some have gone away because technology has advanced or moved beyond some of the previous attempts at kind of bridging the gap. But ultimately, it's a very fluid environment. So I think the jury on that one is really still out.
Yeah.
Right. And I actually, the next question I want to hit on kind of refers to something Irene said before about math. What is I want to hit this directly because we haven't really hit it that directly, but the continuing question about, are we in a recession? Is the recession over? There was an article I read today that said, are we in the middle of, of a bull market? And so there's still questions there. So what is the impact of recent budget cuts resulting fears of a potential recession on retail media networks for advertisers? Shifting the balance of overall marketing budget from building brand equity to driving product sales, as Irene hit on before. What have you seen so far as the budget cuts? How is that affecting this particular growing segment?
I think we have seen a little bit of a reduction in, I don't know that overall budgets are shrinking, but there's a lot more work going into where we're going to put the budget. There's a lot more intention going into that. And to the person who was asking earlier about like the measurement standards, I think that there is a higher standard for measurement and return on ad spend than there was before. I think brands, like I said, like I did refer to earlier, brands are really struggling with how much do I spend on building the brand versus selling the product. And in a world where large retailers are increasingly building out their private brands and at a higher margin, this is a real stressful point for the brands. And I think that hard decisions are being made every day.
Umberto, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think it's more the same. I can't speak to specifically to budgets being cut or not around retail media, retail media opportunities. I will say that given that what we are seeing is and what we have seen, especially in the first half of the year, I think it feels as though this, moving into Q3, Q4, I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to cause a recession myself by saying this, but it feels like we're maybe out of that very specific phase of kind of budget reductions. But certainly, first half of the year, we saw some across advertising and media budgets specifically. Those are definitely being cut because of kind of recession fears and other market economics. But I think my answer is just as a result, you want to be spending your money where it's going to be working, right? You want to make sure that your media dollars are going as far as they possibly can and measured in the most, in the most effective way possible. So again, it feels like the right opportunity for retail media to really take advantage of that, if anything. But yeah, that's just a thought.
Irene, did you have anything else to say?
Nope, I'm good.
The other side of it, we're talking about media spend. The other side of it is the actual technology that brands and companies and marketers may need to actually activate on this, right? So have technology investments and development kept pace for suppliers and brands to realize the value from their advertising investments? Or is that something that people need to focus on as well? Or is that just another part that they're not, really adequately focusing on?
Based on surveys that I've seen, so I can tell you what surveys say versus actual, like what we're seeing happening. Surveys say that MarTech budgets are not, that companies see a greater need than ever to make these investments in MarTech to ensure that their data is clean and usable. At the same time, they are being very careful about what they're spending on. I think the purchase cycles on that MarTech are longer because companies are being a little more thorough and wanting to make sure that they have something that can continue to. The tech stack has to be as agile as all the changes that are happening around us right now, and CTOs are looking at, and CMOs that collaborating together, they're looking at what they're spending their money on very carefully so that they can make sure that they're getting bang for their buck. So I would say we are hearing that MarTech investment is not being reduced. We are seeing a longer sales cycle.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. So let's throw it back on the retail media networks. We've been giving them so much play this entire time and throwing it on brands and advertisers. Let's throw it on the retail media networks themselves. What should the retail media networks be doing better to increase adoption and drive success for advertisers? Maybe Umberto take it first and then wrap it with Irene.
Sure. Look, I think to try and keep it as succinct as possible, I think their opportunity is commensurate with what everyone else is. Everyone is trying to get a part of the dollar, especially when there are less dollars presumably around. So I think it behooves the retail media networks to really gain trust, right? And in order to do that, I think it really requires case studies, testimonials, proof that spending money on their network as opposed to somewhere else is going to drive tangible results. And of course, that means, again, evangelizing the virtues of what they can bring to bear, and why, leveraging a retail media network is such an important opportunity given the privacy constraints and the reduction of third-party data and so on. I think creating as much information and education around it as possible, both on the on the buy side as well as directly with agencies, is going to be what they need to do really to try to separate and get as many dollars off the table as possible. So it's pretty obvious, I suppose, but I know different from what anyone else is trying to do. But they really have the opportunity to showcase some of these some of the benefits and performance and kind of conversion opportunities that they have in a way that it's, again, is quite unique. So I think that's the goal there.
Irene?
I think you summed it up perfectly. It's all about transparency and measurement, and people want to spend money where they are getting a good return, and the better job the retail media networks do in demonstrating the value that they are providing to the brands, and the more money they'll get.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you guys so much. And thank you everybody out there for attending Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Treasure Data. A few reminders before we depart. You can view and listen to this presentation on demand using the same link that you used to attend today. You'll receive an email as soon as the archive is ready. On behalf of our guests with Treasure Data and Silverbullet, thank you so much for your time today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.